Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond Red and Blue, a podcast where we attempt to critically engage with ideas, regardless of political affiliation or social group, using good faith dialectic supported by logic and reason. We want to depolarize the conversation. Polarization is rampant, and we want to address these issues head on, free of fear, with a goal of unity. I'm your host, Beau Richards, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Dan Humphrey.
Greetings.
Let us get started. So today we're going to do a more news-oriented podcast. There's always crazy shit going on in the world, and we thought it might be nice to address some of it, break it down a little bit, and try and pull some kernels, some grains of truth from it, instead of doing what most people do, which is focus entirely on the politics and the polarization. We kind of want to pull away from that and say, what can we glean from this that may be helpful for all of humanity? So it looks like the first thing we have on the docket is going to be Kamala Harris and her stating that her distrust of a potential vaccine that Trump would come out with. So Dan, go ahead and tell me kind of your initial thoughts after hearing her on that interview, kind of showcasing her skepticisms.
Yeah, doing her little political posturing, really. I agree with Crystal Ball from the Hill in that is an irresponsible position to take. When you're in the public eye, in a manner that she is, as large as she is, I mean, she's a huge figure now as the potential vice president and realistically potentially the president. Mm-hmm. She does have a responsibility to the public during a worldwide pandemic to not sow unnecessary fear and doubt.
Yes.
It goes without saying that a vaccine should be thoroughly tested.
Yes.
But if it does turn out to be safe and effective, that's the big asterisk. If it turns out to be safe and effective, then it is her responsibility as a public figure to encourage everyone to take it so we can get past this whole mess. So to politicize the whole thing a couple months before an election, that's just dirty politics, and that doesn't serve anybody. And I'm sorely disappointed, but not surprised. I mean, everything I've seen about Harris is she is very much DNC through and through. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to get any courageous new ideas from her. We're going to get the party line. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because you mentioned the party line. From what I've understood, Biden seems to fall under that party line as well. Like
100%,
yeah. He's towed that party line since the 70s. I think like 73, I think was when he was elected or something.
Yeah. And
yet, before the podcast, he'd referred to it as damage control, but he had went out, made a statement after Kamala had said that, and had basically said that even if he lost the presidency, he would take the vaccine. Yeah. Or even if it cost him the presidency, he would take the vaccine. And I found that to be true. Like, that's how it should be approached. That's what I mean by true there, is that it makes me chuckle when I was reading through this and writing up my notes, because it kind of reminds me of what we're trying to do with our podcast, and that we're not trying to make this a political issue. We're trying to make this more of a search for the truth and doing the right thing, taking responsibility, and just trying to be good humans. Mm-hmm. And that's also what they should be doing. So maybe they should be looking, both you, Kamala, and Joe, you need to be listening to our podcast, because what we're trying to do here is what you should be doing, as opposed to pandering to get political points. Because yes, you take the damn vaccine, you vet it properly, but you take it, because otherwise it's going to create political problems. And all of a sudden, why the fuck would a vaccine be politicized?
Same reason masks are politicized.
Yeah, it's like I don't understand. It's like, why would you? Yeah, and that was exactly another thing. Like, why is there a culture war on mask wearing? Like, I don't understand that. Why is it like, oh, if you don't wear a mask, you're automatically a Republican, or if you're wearing a mask, like, you're not only a Democrat, but you're weak and a sissy or whatever? It's like, no. just no. Like, that should not be the litmus for what it means to take a vaccine to maybe save yourself or your family, or to wear a mask. I understand it from there's a lot of people who don't give a damn about social norms. Generally, I'm kind of one of those. I actually could care less most of the time. I'll do it because I don't see any reason most of the time to create discord amongst people. It's like I want to get along with everyone, but just because I'm told to do something because of society says so doesn't mean I'm going to do it because everyone does it. Like I'll say no if I feel it's unnecessary, but to that, I'm not just going to like run around or not wear a mask just to piss everyone off. It's like I don't want people to die. Whether I think it's real or not, and I don't discount the fact that our current virus is real, but there are people who I think still believe that it's either not as bad as it is or that it may not actually be real. But it's more so like to make that a political issue. Like you said, Crystal Ball, she mentioned the lack of responsibility, or she mentioned that Kamala has a responsibility to because of her visibility and her influence, and it's like that. That's correct. Like it shows a lack of responsibility to not approach it that way. Like you need to grow up, basically. Like,
well, here's the thing, though. It's my belief that if she were the type of person to do that, and this holds true, in my opinion, to anybody in the higher levels of politics, if she had that sort of constitution to be more, for her allegiance to be towards the truth rather than the politics, she would not be allowed to participate at this level. The machinery behind the scenes on both political parties, if you are say, Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang, like you genuinely have some fresh new ideas and you want to shake things up, you don't get to play. You're not allowed. So the fact that she is the nominee for the vice president, again, likely to be the president, is, in my mind, proof that she, frankly, is not to be trusted with a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
It can only be looked at through the lens of if what this person is saying will be good for them politically and also good for me. Well, okay, then that'll be good for me. Much like if you want to doubt whether or not a vaccine would be a politically wise move to participate in if a vaccine is presented, well, a good vaccine, an actually effective vaccine, would be a huge win for Trump.
Yeah.
So he's incentivized to produce that. Now he's also incentivized to get something out quick that may not be as effective, so I'm wary.
Didn't he mention that maybe it wasn't him, but I could have swore I heard that he had mentioned that he expects it'll be out by November? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and it's in that typical Trump fashion of, working on a vaccine and it should be out soon, who knows? Maybe November.
That's right. Okay.
And he just floats these things out there that people take as a factual statement. And he does that very much on purpose.
Yeah.
Politically, he's a bit of a savant in things like that because it is effective. And it works really well, particularly with the current information climate. Meaning, so much more of the quote unquote real world is online now.
Yeah.
We're all locked down. We do more Zoom calls and all that kind of thing. Social media. That is a different reality. The rules are different, and we're still figuring them out. The consequences are different, and we're still figuring them out, unfortunately, the hard way, as opposed to how we have evolved over the last 500,000 years or whatever to communicate with each other. Being in the presence of the person that you communicate with is critical to get the social cues, the facial cues, what the real intent was. All those nuances are, as we're finding out, critical to reasonable communication. If you take all that away, which we have, then you get Twitter fights and Facebook feuds, and it is now spilling over into the quote-unquote real world, where people in grocery stores will interact as though they're having a Twitter feud. It's like, what? We're human beings, man, relax. And I mean, that's just the state of the world right now, and I'm not sure if there's a solution. And I was thinking about this the other day and realizing, and you're probably in the same boat, I'm not on social media. We decided to do this podcast because I have the technical ability and I wanted to put a message out there, but I am not active on social media in any way. I'm uncancelable. because I don't partake. So for me, the real world is still the real world. It's not online. It's not social media for me personally. So my interactions still happen majority with real live
Right.
human flesh and blood.
Until our podcast takes off, and then
There is that.
and then you are online, right?
Exactly. And we'll see how that goes. But I currently still have a physical, real world model
Yes.
of the world, as opposed to, say, millennials and or Gen Z that have literally grown up and developed socially online. And the nuances that are evolving in that arena, and also the nuances that are falling away because they're not in the physical presence of people. It's literally changing communication. How that all shakes out, I don't know. It doesn't look real positive, but human beings are fairly resilient, so I'm sure we'll figure something out. But right now, it's a bit sketchy.
Yeah, no, it very much is, and I want to go back to a couple of things that, or to what Crystal Ball had said, and also to what Kamala Harris had also said too. One of the things Kamala had said in her interview was that, and quote, "things are ugly all the way around," and I thought this. I don't remember exactly what she was attributing it to. I think she was just talking about the craziness of the situation, and it kind of made me realize that, like, she's right. Like, everything is ugly. Like how Trump has handled this, how health officials have handled everything from the beginning. You know, how everyone has kind of bungled this up, and there's a large percentage of the population who doesn't think that the government actually handled this the way they should have. And there's decent evidence now that's out that shows that it's probably actually is true. And
I agree.
and yet, and I take that back. I don't think it was Kamala who said if things were ugly all the way around. I think it was Crystal. But my point is that when things are like that, throwing more into the muck isn't the right way to go about it. Like, that's not how you should solve problems when there's problems. It's just,
Right.
let's just lob another problem onto the situation. It's like, no, you slice through it with truth, with responsibility. You know, I'm going to preach on this forever because it's something that I don't know how to not do, but like you find the problems and you pick them up and you walk through the shit. And that's how you solve these problems. Whatever those answers are, I don't know. A lot of them I don't know. That's why I'm not in the position that Joe Biden is in, nor do I want to be. But I can tell you that the way to go about doing this stuff is not to pander to the pundits who are going to help give you more money or vote for you or whatever. It's you need to give them solutions to the actual problems, not elucidate the problems themselves or make them worse.
I agree with that as a statement. However,
That doesn't mean it's easy, of course. to
well, no, I think
clarify,
there's a
but-
conflict of interest. See, that statement assumes that these politicians really do have the people's well-being as their primary interest, which I do not think is true.
Yes.
I'm not saying that they, hate people or they're misanthropes or anything like that. But the number one priority is to keep winning politically.
Sure.
That's number one, and that is a conflict of interest when it comes to general well-being. I'm gonna take a quick ride and grab my water.
No worries.
And I do have a thought.
While you're grabbing that, I want to give a quick shout out to, you had mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, and I think she deserves a shout out because she was just recently drafted as one of the 2 members on the Article of Unity presidential bid, her and Mr. Dan Crenshaw. So that's pretty awesome. I'm really excited to see what the groundswell of support that's been kind of the grassroots groundswell that's kind of been going on over the last few weeks and months. I'm excited to see if they can take that and make it actionable and get those 2 on the ballots in all the 50 states for the third-party nomination. For anyone who's listening is not familiar, check out Articles of Unity. That's articlesofUnity.org. It's run by evolutionary biologist Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather Hying, who's also an evolutionary biologist.
Weinstein.
Sorry.
Not to be confused.
No, yeah, exactly. And it's a great platform. It's a great idea. It's kind of, it is actually a new way to approach the current political issues that we're in, and it's just a new way to try and help move us forward. Most people are fed up with the duality that we're currently locked in, the left, the right, the red, the blue, the Democrat, the Republican, liberal, conservative dichotomy. And so this is I think it has, over the next few years, if not this year at the election, has a very good shot of disrupting some political norms, which I'm really excited about. And I also just like Dan Crenshaw and Tulsi Gabbard. I think they'd both be very good.
And notably, they like each other.
Yes,
They actually like each other and would be able to work together.
that's the kind of the cool thing is that while they're both Dan is much is a conservative and Tulsi does identify as a liberal, they are both willing to talk and do get along very well. I think that Dan in particular has mentioned that they're good friends, and I think he even might have mentioned that she is probably his closest liberal friend in the House. She's also the most pleasant I've seen, so that doesn't surprise me too much. But so
Doesn't hurt.
that's my very, very short, very long shout out. You had a thought.
Yeah, you had mentioned personal responsibility, and
I will always mention that.
yeah, Brett had another campfire last night.
Weinstein, right?
Yep, Brett Weinstein had a campfire last night, which is, he uses that as a metaphor for how we as human beings evolved to communicate and work out problems, meaning when the day's work was done, when the sun is down and you can't hunt for food, we would gather around a campfire, stay warm, and that is the time where we would discuss the events of the day and the goings-on of the tribe. So he uses that metaphor to bring on guests and have conversations in that format. And he talked about a lot of things, talked about unity, of course, and there was actually some really good discussion on that, so that's worth checking out. But what struck me as really well stated was the standpoint on personal responsibility and opportunity that traditionally the left and the right have taken, where the left is solely focused on the opportunities are unequal and that's not fair and we must fix that. Whereas the right traditionally focuses less on the inequities and says you need to use your own personal responsibility to make the most of what opportunities that you have.
Yes.
You know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I think they're both incomplete in that, and this is Brett's point that I agree with, that there's both societally, as a community of a mere 330 million people, as a society, we have the obligation to create the most equal opportunity, not outcome, opportunity possible. It'll never be perfect. That's not going to happen, but as close as we can get it. And while that is going on, it's the individual's responsibility to make the most of whatever opportunities that you happen to have. Both of those things need to come together. That's kind of the social contract when it comes to opportunity and responsibility. And to ignore either is, do so at your own detriment, and I think a lot of people do. But both need to be considered. It's not either or. They're not mutually exclusive.
No, very true. And I think talking to people is like that's really fundamentally what you're describing is people need to talk, and they need to do so about as free of judgment as you can. Right? You need to be able to sit down with somebody and say, "Hey, I have an idea." And then the person goes, well, that's a shitty idea. But instead of calling you a Nazi or punching you in the face, they tell you why. And then you hash it out. And then maybe you get punched in the face later because maybe that's deserved. I doubt like 95% of the population deserves or would qualify for what it means to be a Nazi. But like, you need to eliminate a lot of that. You need to sit down and say, look, let's hash this out. I don't have the right answers, but I feel like this might be along the way. Does that sound reasonable to you, or is that a horrible idea, and why? And the other person can then respond. And then, because I think you're right, like fundamentally you have a care for the dispossessed, right? The inequalities of the world, which are real. Like they're very, very real, and it is a problem. And I forget who I was listening to, but I was listening to someone over the weekend, and basically what they said is that they feel like there's a very loud group of individuals right now who have identified legitimate problems, but don't know how to aim. Right. And so like how I pictured it in my head was like, you know that there's a problem. Let's say you're hunting and you know that there's a deer out there, but then you turn around and fire your gun towards the houses. Like, you're actually trying to hunt, so that's the first thing, like that, and then you identify where the deer is in the woods, and so that's the actual problems, and that's all correct, and then you know, shoot the wrong direction in a way that's just going to get people killed. I think that's kind of what we're looking at, is that they're identifying the problems, but then they're looking the wrong way. And then the other end, you get too far, and it's like a big thing for them is like, yes, there's inequalities, but the structure that we have works. It works better than it ever has worked. So the answer is not to just throw everything away to fix these perceived inequalities, right?
Exactly.
So you have two problems. One, you have identifying inequities, which is correct, but then pointing your aim at in the wrong direction, right? Let's topple everything. Let's just dismantle everything that we have. And I'm using collectively the language, dismantling the patriarchy, let's say, as a way to describe that, versus let's not just tear everything down. Inequalities are bad, but if you focus too much on how good the system is, the inequalities just inevitably get worse. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a give and take. There has to be. Otherwise, you just get tyranny on both sides. And it's bad either way. And it's like, no, just shut up and talk. What's that line from Wedding Crashers? Shut your mouth when you're talking to me. Do that, right? And but you have to be willing to let go of whatever ego it is that is holding on to these ideas about what the problems are. Like it doesn't mean that there aren't problems and they're not real and they're not really bad and that they're not worse than we actually think they are. It just means that maybe other people have good ideas too, and we should attempt to figure out the proper ways forward together. Otherwise, it's all just, like you said, it's all just going to come crumbling down.
Yeah, I think it's it's partially just because of the dehumanization of our current method of communication, mm-hmm. whereas it's a lot easier to stuff someone into the quote unquote other category, where you have your group of people, which, you know, prior to the internet was however many people that you actually knew and interacted with. But now that's grown into this kind of bastardized concept of these groups that form online. And I don't say bastardized like it's inherently a bad thing, but there are some results of this method of communication where it makes it really easy to consider someone as an other. Mm-hmm. Oh, you're a Republican, you're a Trumper, you're an other, when the reality is we're all human beings. We don't have to agree on everything. We can come together and work stuff out. But when the method of communication for doing so and the organs of sense making, as Eric Weinstein would say, have been corrupted in such a way that we effectively lose our humanity.
Yes.
I think that's really a core piece of the problem. I don't know how to fix it. My gut says, well, get together in person more. Oh yeah, that's right. We got a worldwide pandemic going on. Mm-hmm. So that kind of makes that difficult. I don't know what the answer is, but I do believe that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think a very simple but very difficult to enact answer is, and like I said, I'm going to be a broken record forever on this. Grow up, take some responsibility. I don't care what it is, but do it. And slowly make yourself a better human. And if you have a spouse that you live with, they will inevitably, hopefully, get better too, in whatever ways that they feel they need to get better or just inevitably get better. And then the people that you do interact with, they'll notice the changes.
Well, I'm going to push back on that.
Sure.
This
podcast is over. Thanks, everybody.
First of all, I do agree with what you're saying. However, I think of this from the standpoint of someone who truly believes that they are doing exactly that. Yes, I am taking personal responsibility by going out and marching with Black Lives Matter and taking it however far they believe is necessary, all the way up to Molotov cocktails and looting. They could very well, from their own frame of reference, their own beliefs, go, yeah, I'm doing exactly that. This is me taking personal responsibility. So I think there's another dimension to the conversation, rather than, but in addition to just saying personal responsibility, but taking the humanity into account, being, getting rid of the ego in assuming you're right. You can believe you're right, but always be willing to challenge those notions, because one of two things will happen. You'll either learn something new, or you will fortify your beliefs and you'll feel that much more stronger about them. Yeah. Both are a win. But that requires a hunger for actual truth rather than a social win or belonging to a group, which are very, very powerful forces that some people are going to value way more than truth, especially now that truth itself is being questioned and attacked. And
and so this actually two things. One, I actually do agree with your pushback. I've tried to I've grappled that for a couple of years now, because a lot of protesters, let's say as an example, that you're right, they do believe, right? And maybe they
picture this. As strongly as you feel right now, your personal sense of certainty that personal responsibility is a key to success, someone else feels exactly as strong about something different.
What I would say to that, though, is, at least this is the thing that popped into my head first, is that while that may be true on an emotional, visceral level, I have zero problem whatsoever changing my ideas on personal responsibility if something comes along that I find to be better. And I know this because I changed my mind when I discovered the notion of personal responsibility and found it to be better than whatever nihilism it was I was dealing with from the age of 6 until I was 29. Because that's roughly what it was nihilism to some degree. And because I was an angry young teen and tween and 20-year-old. And so that's the first thing that pops in my mind, is like, I would be shocked if the individuals that we're discussing, really the group that we're discussing, because individualism isn't really a thing with the group by and large, I would be shocked if they would be willing to consider other ideas. And that's part of the problem, is that
not only are they, from what I have seen, not only are they not willing to consider ideas, they are proactively shutting down the communication and expression of said ideas of anybody in the group.
Yes.
Go back to Evergreen with Brett Weinstein.
Yeah.
And as maliciously as he was verbally attacked in the various different, struggle sessions, I would say that they really were. Occasionally, as a great teacher, he would try to pull somebody aside and actually dialogue with them, because they weren't letting him speak when they were yelling at him. And sure enough, people from the group would come over and, don't talk to him. We ain't talking to him. And shut it down.
That's the difference that I see, though, is that, because I do agree, like, a lot of people are taking responsibility, or what they see as responsibility, and following something that they do believe in. And like, there is actually something to be said for not knowing being so frustrated with the system that you want to flip the board upside down. And so, like, I do get that frustration.
Sure.
And it's like, sometimes that's actually necessary. If inequality does get bad enough, the people at the bottom will just burn everything down. And maybe they have a right to. And so I've been grappling with that for a while, because like, I think that might actually be fundamentally a thing that could need to happen. Does I think it needs to happen now? No, but that's something that's there. And so that's their responsibility. That is very, very true. But I think that at the level that it's their responsibility, if they're unwilling to, I think that they feel that they've exhausted all other avenues before they come to that, when that isn't actually true, right? Like, I'm going to try and do as many things as I can before I get to the point that I want to burn things to the ground. I'm not just going to decide the world sucks, I'm going to burn things to the ground, right? And so a lot of the people who feel that way feel that there's no other option but to dismantle everything.
I think they've been fed that line.
And that's what I mean, though, but they believe it.
They believe it, but they didn't like critically think about it and go through all their options. They came across some material or a person that sold them a story, and they're like, "Oh my God, yes, of course, Black Lives Matter, and this is ridiculous, and the patriarchy and intersectionalism." And like, "Oh, I had no idea. Oh yes, I'm on your team." And they'll jump in, and they will automatically give authority to the people that are spreading this message. You know, the Robin DiAngelos and the Ibram X. Kendis, partially out of ignorance.
Yes.
Like, I'm a white person. I didn't realize this was going on. Holy crap. Well, I have to look to somebody who's had this experience or who's been dealing with this for so long. Robin, tell me how to do this. And the reality is that she's just wrong. This is inaccurate. This is not in line with objective reality.
Well, objective reality doesn't exist, so that would make sense.
Whew, yeah.
Yeah.
That's, even words themselves, even knowledge itself is subjective, and your knowledge is different than my knowledge, and the two will never be able to be reconciled other than realizing that they are grabs for power. So how does your knowledge serve you in a quest for power, and everything you say has to be taken into account from that lens? That is such a lack of understanding of what logic is, what the scientific method is. It is what are the answers that you would get repeatably, regardless of who is conducting an experiment, regardless of where they conduct the experiment, works for everybody every time. Okay, we call that a scientific fact. We worked that out, and it's dependable. Therefore, we can call that a piece of knowledge.
Yes.
And that's going away, which
at some point here soon, I want to make sure we do this right. And by that, I mean, I will personally probably have to read the book 4 or 5 times, but I want to do a breakdown of white fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Not just to tear apart some of the more pernicious and destructive ideas, because there are those. I mean, people who've left scathing reviews of the book have said that, the book is basically about how all white people are racist. And I've actually seen people online talk about how that isn't the case, which I find really funny, but I read the book, and that actually is what she literally says this.
Oh yeah, I've seen video of her saying exactly that.
Yeah, she doesn't, it's not like people are, kind of exacerbating what she's saying or anything. She literally on one of the pages says, all white people are racist. So that's a little divisive.
You think?
And so, but what I think would be good to do is at some point to kind of, because there's a good number of legitimate truths, kernels of truth, grains of truth in what she says.
Yeah.
Because like we were talking about earlier, there are actual problems in the world. There are inequities, racism, sexism, bigotry, homophobia, transphobia. These things all do exist. They're not figments of BIPOC imagination. This isn't and white people just don't see it. That's not actually how the world works. This actually does happen to everybody, regardless of race, color, creed, religion, what have you. It happens to some people or some races or genders more than others, but it's real. And so she's pointing a finger at the actual problem, but aiming at the wrong direction, I think, is the big issue. And she does make a lot of generalizations that I personally find very, very silly. Her interactions that she has in the book, or some of her interactions and stories that she tells, I find just to actually be racist, but also really weird. I forget. Like I said, when we go over this more in depth, I'll bring up one of the examples in particular where she talks about something, and it's a situation that I just would never assume what it was that she assumed, because it's a silly thing to assume. I think it was an example of a barbecue.
Right.
I remembered it. So the example is she's going to a barbecue for a friend from work or something, and she gets to the park, and there's a large group of white people barbecuing and a large group of black people, and her first thought is, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, I hope I don't have to have barbecue with the black folks.
Yep.
And
She's told that story on the video as well. Yeah.
And I'm sitting here thinking, like, A, I've never thought that. B, you've clearly never had barbecue. So
Damn, I want some of that.
I'm sorry, but I
that white folk barbecue. Come on.
I've had barbecue in Atlanta from a bunch of Southern Baptist blacks, and I was at a Southern Baptist convention, and the vast majority of Southern Baptist, at least in southern states where it's most prominent, are black, and they have absurd barbecue and it's delicious. So I'm not going to care if I have to. Not that I'm just going to go just for that alone, but they have good food. I'm not worried about it. They're also lovely people, but also her friend was white, so she should have noticed the one white person in the black barbecue, which she doesn't. She like,
Right.
as like an
honestly-
obvious example. I'm like, no,
Right.
you're not. You're not going to look and be like, I hope I don't have to go over there. You're going to say, my white friend's not over there. It's only black people. She must be in the other group.
I think D'Angelo has a very Freudian situation
Yeah.
in that Freud just insisted that everybody did everything because they wanted to fuck their mother.
Yeah.
Bruh, that was just you. Robin, you're racist.
Yeah, and
Glad you realize that, but don't put that on everybody.
yeah, and it's just very interesting. And it's like, okay, sure, like I'm on board with the idea that, say, technically color blindness isn't an issue. Like if I go to a barbecue at a park and I notice that, I'm not going to not notice that black people are there because I don't see
Right.
color. I'm going to notice a group of black people, but I'm not going to say, oh, I hope I don't have to go over there. Like
Yeah.
if I have to go over there, I have to go over there. I don't care.
I will say I think that and during this whole as D'Angelo has exploded after George Floyd and stuff like that, I will give credit to that concept of don't be colorblind.
Yeah.
Where because I fell into that camp because I don't care, but I think there is value in acknowledging if you grow up black in America, that's a different experience,
Sure.
and it's not a value judgment. It's a recognition of someone's circumstances.
Sure.
And you can say the same thing if you come from upper middle class and you happen to be interacting with someone who is lower middle class. They probably didn't do their spring break in Cabo. You might want to know that going in before you make them feel bad about it, or something. You kind of get
Yeah.
the example.
I was
of,
that person. I've never. I
I never went to Cabo.
no. I don't even know where Cabo is. Is it Mexico?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
I've never been to Mexico.
Yeah,
So.
assuming you know where Cabo is.
Yeah.
The awareness of someone else's experience is
Important.
It's important, and it's a useful tool in fostering just good communication with another human being. So don't be colorblind, but don't make a value judgment on it.
Well, that's the thing.
I agree
Is,
with that.
like, in as much as it is important that someone has had an experience or experiences throughout their life, say because of their blackness or their, or their femininity or their gayness, whatever, whatever label you want to attribute to somebody, that doesn't mean that it's the only thing about them.
Yes.
That it should be the only thing about them, and most importantly for me, that in the broad scheme, like in the grand scheme of who they are as an individual, that it's actually even at all like that important or the most important thing about them.
And unfortunately, and I agree with that 100%. I believe it's critical race. It's either critical race theory or postmodernism. They blend together in my head. But the dehumanization and de-individualization of the person is at the core. That means, yes, you don't matter because you are a brown body. You are a white body before anything else.
Yeah.
That is your most important responsibility is to be a whatever, a black body.
Part
It's
of the
like,
group.
What the fuck are you talking about?
And
If anything, you could say that this country, this giant patch of dirt that we call the United States, was founded on, personal opportunity, individuality. That's what we've decided. That's how we've decided to structure things on this patch of dirt, and that was written down. So that's a core tenet of how we all agreed to do this. So to attack that is to literally attack the United States, attack the Republic.
Yeah.
And what is it you think you're going to replace it with?
That's really the big thing for me is that, like I said, we've mentioned again and again on this podcast that there are actual grains or kernels of truth or what have you to a lot of this stuff. The biggest issue for me is that what next?
Yeah.
Like I'll probably ask that a lot because we'll get more into critical race theory in particular because it's littered. It's not. I don't think it's actually explicitly named in White Fragility, the book, but Robin DiAngelo, her whole ethos is built upon that. But
so just to interrupt, I noticed that Helen Pluckrose was giving a talk. It was on the New Discourses talking about postmodernism, and she made a really good point about Robin DiAngelo because kind of her lineage back to the initial postmodern thought in the 30s and et cetera, et cetera. But what DiAngelo did is she took postmodernism, she took critical race theory, she took intersectionality, and packaged it in common language that everybody can digest.
And that's why it's popular.
Exactly. And the same thing could be said for anybody that's been involved with like personal growth and development. Tony Robbins did the same thing. Tony Robbins came up with very, 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 very little original material. Mm-hmm. He was, regurgitating stuff that people have been saying a long time, that people had been regurgitating from people before them.
Sure.
But he packaged it in a way that, made him
accessible.
Millions back in the 80s and 90s. And it's very effective. I'm not knocking Tony Robbins, but that was a big reason that, he kind of became the name of personal growth and development. Because he was able to put it into plain language. And Robin DiAngelo, I think a great deal of her success is for the same reason.
Well, yeah, and so like I was mentioning...
pull that mic away a little bit.
Pull it away?
I had it set for where you had it before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No worries.
So I wanted to clip. Perfect.
Okay, good. So the issue for me isn't identifying the problems. Like I think people tend to have an idea of what the problems actually are. It's the aim, and the aim seems to be like this regression into racial essentialism, into tribalism, into original sin that you can't get rid of. Mm-hmm. Like at least in Catholicism, there's absolution at the end, or in Protestant religions, there's absolution at the end, and that's the problem. Is it's like let's actually solve the issue, and I just don't think that shoving everyone into groups and then somehow not having a race war at the end isn't the solution, because that's what'll happen.
It's inevitable. How many times have you heard someone from the BLM camp or the critical race theory camp saying this work will never be done?
Yes.
And nobody stands up and says, what the fuck? What are you talking about? Will never be done. So you will always be right, and we will always be subservient to you and your view of the world to tell us what the real truth is and how to act. That doesn't make any sense. That makes about as much sense as white people doing that to black and brown people. So you're just flipping the script, and that's not going to help anybody.
Here's the grain of truth, though. People are biased. So there will always be racism and sexism and other forms of bigotry to deal with, and that's how it gets used, and that's how it continues to be used without anyone scoffing at it. It's like you're calling it out, and I think that's correct. But someone's going to come back and say, "What? We're not going to have racists in 50 years?"
There will always be bigotry and racism.
So the work is never done.
There will be a level of acceptability when that. Bigotry and racism no longer impacts your opportunities, because someone can be as fucking racist as they want inside their own house. That is their right to do.
Yeah.
Believe what they want. Just the same that, you get to believe in a zombie Jesus, which sounds really fucking intense. I'm an atheist, but I only say that just to push the buttons of anybody who may be listening, in that cherish your beliefs, but realize that it's your right to believe them, but it's not your right to force everyone else to believe the same thing. Yes. So if you want to believe in a certain flavor of religion, somebody else gets to believe in some racist ideology, but they do not get to affect other people at the point where they are negatively impacting someone else's opportunities. That's where we got to make some laws. That's where we got to put a stop to it and, take authoritative action if needed.
Yeah.
But you can't. This is not the thought police. So to say the work, the stopping point of the work, quote unquote, is when we get to a reasonably close level of equal opportunity. Once we have that, I say that the work is done. It'll never be mathematically perfect.
Sure.
It can be improved. Let us not forget how far we actually have come. If you talk to some of the people that have gone through civil rights, or even people that have worked really hard, black people that have worked really hard to gain success in academia or in business, and maybe they're in their 40s or 50s or 60s right now, and they can remember back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we're trending in the right direction. It has gotten a lot better. We still got work to do.
Yes.
But let's keep pushing in this direction and making it better rather than screwing the whole thing up and causing a civil war and setting everybody back who knows how far.
Sure. So I'll push back a little bit on what you said about the work being done. I actually agree with the statement as it stands. The work is never done. And the reason I agree with that is because I think we always, as a community, have to have a dialogue between opposing viewpoints, between opposing temperaments, between the right and the left, let's say, conservatives and liberals, whatever. That actually can't stop because bad stuff happens when it does. The problem that I have with the statement is when you put it in context with what we're discussing with, say, critical race theory, is there's a bigger question or a more important question, that is, what is the work? That's the question for me. Is that
I was just going to push back on your pushback with that exact question.
That's where the pushback for me starts. Not necessarily on the work is necessarily done. I think that it's more of a, let's clean the house up, and then we can relax for a bit. And we notice the house gets a little bit dirty, let's clean it up. Or maybe let's try and stay on top of the dirt, vacuum a bit, do the laundry. But in that regard, keeping your house clean is never technically done, but you're done with your chores every day. Does that make sense?
Well, if you speak of it in terms of rather than reform, it is the maintenance of systems that are in place, then my assumption was I didn't consider that the work. It is work, of course. Maintenance is work. But when I hear someone from the critical race theory camp talk about the work is never done, I read that as white people will always be racist and cannot repent.
Sure.
The best you can do is become an anti-racist and do what we tell you to do because we know what's right because you're not black and we are, so you just got to listen to us.
Very, very true. And yeah, because I actually do agree with that assessment. That's what I hear too. However, I think it's good to clarify that a lot of people aren't aware of that or aren't going to believe that that's the connection being made, because it, on the surface, unless you've actually looked into this stuff, it seems like quite a far leap. And so I wanted to kind of make those distinctions a bit, because we're always going to have to work to get along, regardless of how people feel about it. But it's like, define the work for me. If by work you mean what you were saying earlier, a second ago about white flagellation and groveling and foot kissing and tears or no tears. There can't be tears. I forgot white tears.
You can't do tears? No white tears. Oh, that's right. Because white women tears. Yeah, that's
can't
oppressive.
Do tears.
Yeah.
I don't know if male tears. Male tears, you probably can't cry if you're a guy too. Men shouldn't cry.
If you got a man bun, you'd probably be okay. Shout out to all the man buns out there.
Get your fucking haircut. I lost my train of thought because now
mind you, we're not on video right now. I have a very short crew cut, and
I'm bald.
Both fully bald. So, yeah, a couple hippies in the house.
Right. But yeah, so that would be what my either pushback or my clarify there is that I think that it's defining the work, and for me that's really just defining the problem or aiming at the right problem. Or not aiming at the problem, aiming at the problem and trying to figure out what we can do to fix it. And
I think I would call that accurately defining the problem.
Yes, and that's hard. Like a lot of what we're talking about isn't necessarily easy too. That's part of it. Is it may be somewhat simple to identify, but it's not easy to implement. And I think that's why a lot of people. I think that's why people latch onto a lot of these platitudes that sound good. I actually do believe fundamentally that's why I say the phrase like Black Lives Matter is so popular. It's popular in part because people are empathetic, they have compassion, they don't want black people to die, and that's laudable, and I don't want that either. But it's a phrase that like you can't disagree with it.
I find it as true as the Patriot Act.
Yeah.
Who's going to disagree with the Patriot Act?
Yeah, there's this
Nothing patriotic about that motherfucker.
there's this episode in Parks and Rec where the reasonableists, they're a group of individuals that believe that Zorp, who's like a 30-foot tall lizard, is going to come down to Earth and he's going to breathe fire and everyone's going to be melted and turned into fuel. They called themselves the reasonableists because they reasoned that no one would criticize them.
Exactly.
Because then
Yes.
they'd be criticizing reason. And this is that kind of, and I think
Yep.
that they were making a joke about like a lot of these more radical platitudes that are used, these ideologies that they use, these simple platitudes that it's like, well, this is easy, it's surface level, I don't have to think about it.
Well, it's absolutely that, and it's on the on an intellectual level. I've heard Brett call it a Mott and Bailey, which, for those not familiar, in I believe medieval times, when there were villages and castles and such, and you needed to protect your village from marauders and whatnot, the expense it would take to create a defensive perimeter for an entire village, let's call it 100 acres or whatever, was untenable. Maybe there's not enough stone in the area to, for whatever reason, like we can't fortify this whole thing, but what we can do is put up a fence or a short wall around the village itself where there's space to grow your crops and have your livestock and do the things you need to do. But there is, and that's the Bailey, and then there's the Mott, which is it's typically up on a hill, which particularly back then with hand-to-hand fighting, having an elevated position is hugely advantageous.
Yep.
So they throw it up on a hill and they fortify the crap out of it, and it looks kind of like a castle or what have you with stone. And it's essentially a panic room.
Yeah.
Where if someone is attacking, everybody goes out of the Bailey and they head up into the Mott where they're safe.
Yeah.
Now they can't tend their fields, they can't take care of their livestock, so you can't live in there, but you're safe from whatever the marauding force is. So
It's Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings.
exactly.
Yeah.
So how that works with these arguments is when someone makes a radical statement like white supremacy is something that can never be conquered and all whites are white supremacist. If you attack the Bailey of that idea, then they can retreat up to the Mott of, well, Black Lives Matter. What, do you hate black people?
Yeah.
Where you take a controversial idea, you float that, you try to advance that idea, and if anybody attacks that idea, you retreat to a very obvious, simple statement and try to connect those two. And that's where the logical fallacy lies.
Well, yeah, and another thing I just thought of, I thought was very interesting. So with Black Lives Matter, we have the alternative, or one of the alternatives, Blue Lives Matter. And this is a good example of kind of what you're explaining and how strong it is. People came up with Blue Lives Matter to talk about protecting cops. But the very simple caveat to that is that people aren't born blue. And so they don't have that Mott that you're talking about.
Right.
Because if they're born blue, they means that there was a stillborn death. So
Yeah.
they're not actually alive. So,
Right.
technically speaking, and so that's the power of that sort of thing is it's like, well, the counter to it, and again, what's the counter to all lives matter? It's like, well, you're a racist. Like, Black lives don't matter. It's like, they have a point. Like with most things, there's
Yeah.
a grain of, there's like an actual truth to that, but it's intellectually shallow.
Yes.
But it's easy to parrot and it's easy to feel, and there's an emotional response to it, which is, as there arguably should be, because Black lives do matter, and you should feel some pain when you watch, let's say George Floyd is an example. You watch Derek, I don't remember his last name, the white guy, literally do neon belly on his neck for 9 minutes.
Oh, Tony Timpa, yeah, the white guy.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I've had someone put their shin across my stomach and my chest and my face. Like, it hurts. Like, I was very, very fucking angry watching that happen for 8 minutes and 6 minutes and 40 seconds, whatever the time frame was. Like,
8:42.
that's way too long. It doesn't matter to me if he's the reason for George died, or if George died of his own accord due to an overdose, due to drugs in his system. It doesn't matter. That's wrong. And so it's like, it creates that emotional response, as it should. However, like with most things, in order to reason through stuff, you got to take a deep breath and say, wait a minute, is there more to this? And when
Thinking is hard, man. I can't retweet that.
well, that's the thing, is that thinking is hard. And I don't blame a lot of people for being lazy and not wanting to think, like, because it sucks. But like with anything else, it's simple and not easy. Like, coming up with like thinking through this stuff, it isn't, there's not really anything complicated about it. You just got to sit down and think. We've been thinking since we were kids. Like, the act of thinking in and of itself, to do it, isn't really all that difficult for us anymore. Doing it well is hard.
It depends on who you're talking to.
It's true, yeah. But see, there's a differentiation between like, oh, I'm going to think a thought, and then thinking an actual good thought, and then thinking it through,
Right.
and then challenging that thought, and then having a dialectic with somebody.
Critical
and then-
thinking.
Exactly, and so it's like, that's hard to do, but I think it's what's necessary. Is I actually like doing it. I might be a masochist for that. I don't know. I prefer to challenge myself with different ideas, and I prefer to sit down and think very hard until I have a headache, or until I get tired, or until I get angry over stuff that I like and don't like, because I don't have all the answers. And it would seem to me that if I prematurely close off other people talking and other people's ideas without assimilating them and fighting the ideas that I have, that I don't know, I feel like an asshole.
I agree with that. I feel very similarly, and at least it's been my experience with people that I have met, that the majority of them do not feel the same way.
Yeah.
I think that's part of why we came together, because we're like, hey, another person that actually likes to think hard about stuff and beat on ideas. And I don't think that's the norm, and I don't think it would be reasonable to expect that to be the norm. That being said, hopefully anybody who does resonate with that will be willing to speak up. We're trying to do our part to do exactly that.
Let us take a move on to Mr. Joe Biden's visit to Kenosha, Wisconsin, right, where he apparently was giving out scripts to people
or
to read.
some sort of guidelines. Yeah.
I just watched a short video where I don't know if she gave her name, but a woman stood up and basically was like, someone gave me this script to read, but I think you need to hear the truth. And then she
exactly
talked about how angry people were, and which is understandable given all of the things that have occurred. But I don't personally have... the intelligent thing that I would do is shake my head. That's where I'm at with this, is I'm just like, okay, like, this is just one of those things that this doesn't surprise me at all.
Oh no, to me it was
Assuming it's true, like assuming that it is true and this is what was happening. This is just another example to me of our government doing things that they don't even flabbergast me anymore. It's just absurd and ridiculous to me that, like, I feel like 4 years ago, this would have been something that was so shocking.
right.
Or 3 years or 2 years or 8 years ago or 15, people would have been like, what? But we're in an era right now where, like, this is like the 30th most important thing to deal with.
Dude, you know what was shocking 15 years ago? Fox News may not be actual journalism. I think they call them talking points, and I don't think they're telling the truth. That was news 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And since then, journalism has officially died, or is absolutely on life support. Folks like Matt Taibbi and they're making a good go of it, but corporate journalism is no more.
Yeah.
So
tell me some of your thoughts about that whole scenario, that whole situation. What's kind of going on in your head about it?
I agree with the relevance of it. Same as you, but I find it satisfying to hear evidence of what we assume was true. To be like, I figured that these town halls and stuff, they're not super legit.
Sure.
They're giving their own talking points. To see evidence of that it very slightly clarifies the picture that much more of how corrupt the whole thing is. It's not surprising in any way, but it is satisfying to get a piece of good evidence. Similar to what recently came out, the audio recordings that Bob Woodward has of Trump acknowledging that he was aware of the coronavirus being airborne in February, chose not to do anything about it. He admitted to playing it down so as to not to create a quote-unquote panic.
Yeah.
So the things that we have assumed he admitted to on tape. It's not revolutionary, but it's very satisfying to hear him admit to it.
Yeah.
And I have no illusions that he'll be held accountable for it. It may be, slightly politically disadvantageous, but he'll call it fake news and move on.
Yeah, so I have a couple things on this one. I'll keep the first part short, but I'm not entirely sold yet that he should, I don't know. I don't necessarily blame him for not telling people. Personally, I would prefer to have told people the truth. I would have done it, I think. It's hard to say if I was president would I have told the truth, right? But I would have preferred the truth myself. So I don't like that he didn't tell people the truth. That's upsetting to me as, a member of this country and as a voter and whatnot. But I would imagine that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of things that have gone on over the history of this country that the president has learned about and not told the country about for the specific reason of not wanting to incite a panic.
Did they unnecessarily cost 50 to 70,000 lives?
And so that's where the problem is it's like, okay, so that's kind of where I teeter is like, well, at what point did his not walking back that narrative and changing his tone actually lead to lives? And that I think he's responsible for. But I don't think that it's not as bad as you think. There's a difference for me because initially I can understand, I don't want to create a panic, but once you realize that it's not going the way it should, and that you need to say, look, it's actually a big issue. Now, I could be wrong on that. I'm willing to listen to arguments where the proper thing to do is just say, this is a big fucking problem. Everyone stay inside. Because honestly, what we probably should have done is lock down for 6 weeks completely.
Yep.
Had we done that for all of February and early March, this probably wouldn't be an issue.
Yep.
And we'd be rolling right after this.
I agree.
Because we'd be able to do jiu-jitsu.
Yep.
And that's hindsight, though. And now, apparently for Trump, maybe that wasn't hindsight. I don't know. And so there's a lot of moving parts there, but it isn't clear to me that just the act of not telling the general public something that very much would freak a whole hell of a lot of people out, he should be necessarily accountable versus telling, that's his job, and that's what he's signed up for, roughly speaking, by running for president. But it's hard for me to just cast the stone and say, you should have obviously done the other thing. Like a lot of people died. It's like at the time, he may not have known that.
I would venture to say, only based on what he has presented over the last 4 years, what he has actually done by the facts, not by what he says, not by what anybody else says, but if you just look a list of what has happened, that is not his interest in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. He admitted on tape that it was way more deadly than the flu. He said, they're talking 5% instead of 1% or under 1%, meaning of everybody that gets it with the flu, 1 or slightly under 1% will be fatal. And coronavirus at that time, they were looking at 5%. Didn't turn out to be that, but that was the assumption at that point. So he knew this at least 5 times more deadly than the flu, which kills a ton of people every year.
Yep.
So he knew that. And it makes me wonder, well, why wouldn't he want to create a panic, so to speak? And based on his track record, again, just the facts, it is because it would negatively impact the stock market. And that's it.
Sure.
Whereas if you look back to, say, FDR, or even I'll give Obama some credit. I disagree with a lot of stuff that happened there, but he seemed like a good guy. If he was to make that call, I may give him the benefit of the doubt. Like, hey, I need to hear more. What was the reason? How bad would this panic have been? Yeah. Like, okay, that's a talk worth having. I don't believe that's where Trump is coming from at all.
Yeah.
And not just because I'm a never Trumper or something like that. I think regardless of your politics, this cat shouldn't be running shit. It seems so simple, no matter what side of the aisle you're on.
Yeah.
This fucking guy he's a gangster in the White House.
Sure.
Dr. West had it right. So yeah, I can't give him the benefit of the doubt on that.
It's tough though, because like I said, for me the biggest issue is, okay, you're faced with this knowledge and you know that things are early, the actual data you have is not a lot, but it doesn't look good. Do you go out there and tell the truth and say, look, this is what we're looking at? Well, do you do tell the truth, but do it in the way that Trump would do it, let's say? And then hopefully, people panicked anyways.
Oh yeah.
And so
remember the toilet paper scare?
Yeah. Well, imagine if that's worse. And this is where my mind goes. And like I said, I'm not saying that what I'm trying to explain is actually correct. I don't know exactly what the right way to handle this would be.
Right.
All I'm saying is that it isn't as simple as there's been a lot of deaths, therefore he's wrong. I think there's more to it than that.
Absolutely.
He's responsible for some things, and he's done some things very poorly, and I think he should be called on that. But just to say, you knew this and lied about it, a lot of people died, therefore it's your fault, and there's nothing else like that. That's where I draw the line, where there's a little bit more to it than that. And so it's like, what if he says it, and maybe I'm just giving him too much credit, I don't know, but what if he says it, and instead of the toilet paper shortage that we see and the hysteria that came with that, we see something that's infinitely worse. We see a bunch of people who can't get toilet paper and are freaked out, and there's a high death rate. At one point in Washington, it was 12%.
Boy, what if that led to riots in the streets?
That's my point, is what if not even just riots? What if it was legitimate?
We landed there already.
Vigilantism. A couple months early, and then it's okay, now
are we still talking about March?
Yeah, right. And so it's at that point, to avoid, where's the line where you want to avoid that, and then something bad still happens that makes sense. Now,
yeah,
where I do think that there's the issue is when he realized maybe a month, 2 months later that this isn't going as well as it should have. We should have clamped down. That's when you do that in March, April. You say, you know what, I fucked up, or Fauci fucked up, or Obama fucked up, whatever it is you want to say, because he probably would just do that. But blame someone who's not even part of the problem. And then it's their fault, they're sorry, but now we're going to fix it, and we're going to lock down. It's too late for that now. Mm-hmm. And so
by every account, Trump is completely self-serving and entirely was focused on his reelection during this whole thing. And I look back to a guy named Jim Rohn, who's a business coach and stuff like that. And he makes this great point of people getting all upset about liars, people that lie, and say, well, liars shouldn't lie. Well, of course they should lie. That's why we call them liars. And it's kind of like the tale of the frog and the scorpion. Yeah, Trump is a self-serving liar. He's proven that. So what would you expect a self-serving liar to do? So to me, it's other than the intellectual exercise of discussing what should or should not be done, this motherfucker ain't going to do it. So for the current situation, maybe we save that discussion for a later time, because it's definitely not going to have any effect on what he's actually going to do.
Yeah.
I have zero reason to believe he would ever do the right thing because it's right, only because it would benefit him. And if it happens to be right as well and a good thing, then we got lucky. And that's it.
Exactly. And so to tie kind of this to, this reminds me of two things. One is kind of to what Kamala did when we were talking about it at the top of the podcast, the withholding of the truth for political favor, political gain, right? Or throwing shade or skepticism on an issue. There's a little bit of a difference there, but what they're both doing is they're both making decisions that are arguably wrong, or at least untruthful to the public that they serve, for the purposes of some sort of political gain in the future. And that's a problem, right? And that actually brings me to, unless you have more to say, I was going to move on to something that Biden actually said in one of the town halls he was in. He said quite a few things. I'll go over one, and then we can talk about one of the things that was kind of silly. But this is a quote from him. It's not the whole quote, but it's part of it. It's, people fear that which is different. For example, why in God's name do we not teach history in history class? he didn't really qualify this with anything. He just kind of said this, and they didn't like give an example of like what he meant. It's kind of clear what he means. Like,
This was awkward. I think I know the clip you're talking
yeah.
about.
Now, this kind of reminded me a little bit of what I was just mentioning about what Trump was doing and what Kamala both did. In that, in all these cases, maybe not Trump's case because he's much more of a self-server than he is an empathetic individual looking out for people. But there's hiding the truth in an attempt to help the people. Because he did mention, he's like, I didn't want to incite a panic. And I think that might actually be true. Mm-hmm. He probably wanted the market to not crash and there was like self-serving things, but he also didn't want a panic to occur. And so there's like a willful hiding of the truth to protect people. And that I see as a problem, right? Kamala's she's not really doing the same thing there. I don't really see that as like hiding the truth. She's kind of pretty clear about what it is that she wants, but I did see a parallel there, and it's with how it works with history. Like, I think Biden's point was that like we've kind of whitewashed history and sort of left out a lot of the nastier bits of racism, mm-hmm. which does seem to be true.
100%.
Yeah,
absolutely. You could fact check that shit.
Yeah, exactly. And so in both cases, there's going to be a lot of reasons, let's say, why historians and teachers have taught the things that they've taught about racism. One of the reasons I think it's this protection issue. I think it's actually partly an empathetic or a compassion issue of we don't want to ruin future generations with the bad shit that our ancestors did. There's more to it. Like I said, there are more things. It isn't like, I think this is the biggest reason, but the two tied together for me in the respect that I think it seemed to me that it could be a willful ignorance of the truth so that people aren't hurt. And all it does is hurt people. Because that's all it does in both cases. Like more people I don't know if necessarily more died as a result of Trump not saying anything versus if he would have incited panic. Probably did, but I don't know because it didn't happen. But more
panic that is didn't happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Corona's still kicking.
Corona's not real. But it's this notion that in an attempt to protect people from these horrors, like we just end up doing more and more damage. Like look at where we are right now and the polar issues that we're up against. And it's like this, I do feel that if generations were given the benefit of the doubt that they could understand and deal with the truths that our country holds, whether good or bad, we may not be in this position right now.
I agree 100%. Yep.
And it's like,
hold people as able to handle the truth.
Yes.
Most people are adults. And they can handle the truth. I get the impulse, though. I will offer that on a personal level. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of parents have the instinct to hide their fighting or whatever bad stuff is going on from their kids to quote unquote protect their kids. And in a lot of cases, I believe that to be effective. I found out as an adult some of the shit that went on when I was a kid, and I already knew how crappy it was.
Yeah.
But finding out some of the other stuff that I didn't know about at the time would have made it worse and may very well have sent me careening down, a very shortly terminating path in my life, dead or in jail kind of thing. I was close enough without it, but had I had that information, I very well might have made some really poor decisions. So I personally benefit from that.
Yeah.
And my sister had to, take on the weight of that until we were adults, and she kind of shared some of that with me. And she did that because she loves me. I get that. But on a societal level, it's different.
Yeah.
You owe the society the truth. It's not just your kids. This is everybody. These are adults that you need to give them the opportunity to decide on how they feel about these facts themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the difference lies, and kind of where the instinct comes from. Mm-hmm. You want to shelter your kids, which has gotten out of control, but anyway, helicopter parenting and whatnot. But there's a reasonable instinct, but at a societal level, it's just ineffective and bad policy.
Well, no, very true. And so I'll go through a couple of ideas that this kind of came to mind. When I was thinking through this idea of like how history has not been taught, or how it's been taught has been sort of, let's say, whitewashed or softened to some degree.
Did you learn about Tulsa and Black Wall Street?
No,
I sure didn't.
no. There's a lot of things I didn't learn about communism until I was like 28. Like, I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
I had actually, I was talking to my girlfriend and her family about this, about communism and other things, but I didn't realize till I was in my late 20s that one of the kids I went to school with, he dressed up as Chairman Mao for Halloween. He was an Asian kid, and people used to call him Chairman Mao because it was a good costume, and so the nickname just kind of stuck. And I actually just thought he wanted to be called that because it was funny, and I didn't know who Chairman Mao was.
Gotcha.
I thought people were just calling him that because he's Asian. I was like, okay, like it's a little racist, but like, okay, whatever. Like if he's fine with it, it was his idea. Like, I'm
Sure,
whatever. And then I found out like 10 years later that it was actually like someone who was responsible for roughly 100 million deaths. And I was like, oh, then it's like darkly funny and fucked up. But anyways, I digress. So, so I'm like thinking through this whole idea about history and kind of how it's been softened. And, we've seen this throughout a lot of other countries. Like Germany does this when it comes to the Holocaust. And it's like, no wonder, because it's terrifying. But the first thing that actually came to mind for me was white fragility. Not the book, but like what it means. And the reason is because for generations we have, as a culture, not actually, I think, legitimately talked about the horrific history of our country. We've kind of softened it. So then you have a bunch of white people who aren't taught about how bad history actually was.
Right.
And then they're fragile to it. And I was like, maybe that's what Rob and D'Angelo should have actually written about. Not about how we can't talk about race and then we have all these things about it and I don't want to talk about it, so I run away or cry or whatever. It's like, maybe we're a little fragile because we had helicopter parents who didn't expose us to the horrors of the world. And so when we get thrown out into it, we're like, holy shit. Like that's what came to my mind. And it's like, it's almost a redefinition, but it makes more sense to me in that I think that there is a little bit of truth to the concept that a lot of white people just don't know what it's like to actually be black.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
And first of all, of course, but I agree with that. I agree with the sentiment of that as well, particularly from my own experience.
Sure.
It's to me, white fragility addresses the instinct to think that it's not that bad if you don't know how bad it really is.
Sure.
Meaning, as a standard issue white guy moving through the world, I see that we got a 2-term black president. We see lots of black folks on TV.
Dave Chappelle's the greatest comedian in the world right now.
Absolutely.
Blacks are doing great.
Yeah. So it seems like we are almost post-racial. That's kind of what it feels like. And we never see anything different. Now, it wasn't until I got into a relationship with a black woman that I got a closer inside look to what it is to move through America with dark skin. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, crap.
It's a little different.
And there are things that I was able to spot when I was informed that this is what to look for. Like, oh, shit, that person really is following us or giving a look. Or like, okay. And then understanding that every day, if you've got black skin, this is how you move through the world. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you're going to experience a lot of things that no other white person will witness, because a lot of it's going to happen just, one-on-one or
Sure.
when you are the only, meaning the only black or brown person in the interaction. So there's, nobody to bear witness as to what happened. And what does happen with that is a lot of times if the black person is typically the only, meaning the only black person in the room, which is very common for a lot of black folks, if you are the only, you have inevitably tried to explain some of this to a white person.
Yeah.
And the white person inevitably thought, nah, it's not that bad, and tried to play it down because we didn't know.
Sure.
So for me, I absolutely own up to the fragility part of that. When I finally wrapped my head around that and was like, oh, fuck, yeah, I'm guilty of that. Mm-hmm. I tried to blow it off because it is hard to deal with mentally. It's like, oh, that's ugly. No, it's not that bad. Come on, be happy. So it's a tough pill to swallow.
Sure.
But I believe it's one that we should. But to extrapolate from that every white person is a racist and can never be fixed, that is where this thing is bastardized to a point that it not only mutes the importance of the message, but it goes against the importance of the message. It will not bring people together. It will only push them apart. It is one of the most divisive things you could possibly say to a human being. And it
is racial essentialism.
Exactly. And I think at its core, it denies each individual human being their humanity, meaning you, Beau, don't matter because you're a white body. So fuck you, Beau. You got to do white body shit.
A racist white body shit.
Right.
Let's not forget.
Exactly.
And I'm a dude, so that's worse.
Exactly. So your responsibility as a living organism is not to be a person. No, fuck you as a person. You are first and foremost a whatever body, and that's where you are obligated to align with and behave in such a manner that furthers the cause of your group. And that dehumanizes everybody. And what happens when you dehumanize everybody is it becomes incredibly easy to oppress those people.
Yeah.
A la China, a la the USSR. When, you make the claims of we are striving for this utopia, well, okay, who's going to run shit? We got to figure out the mail and the railroads and grocery stores. Who's going to do that? People. Okay. Well, if you're dehumanizing everybody, first of all, you get rid of all the incentives, so nobody's going to want to strive to do anything. And the people that, for whatever reason, are in the positions of power to actually do the running of shit are going to be universally susceptible to corruption.
Yes.
These are historical facts. This is not a theory. This is just what happens. We've seen it before, and it will absolutely happen again if this ideology gets a deep enough foothold in this country, or what's left of this country.
No, and I agree, and I think that it's the extrapolation that she makes, and like I said, we'll touch on this more when we go over her book, but it's just another example of identifying a problem or an issue or something, and then aiming the wrong direction and pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, like, sure. Like there's going to be a lot of reasons for why white people, let's say, may be quote unquote fragile about race related things. Right. Some of those are just genuine ignorance. Some of those are actual racism. Some of those are not even racial ignorance. It's just, you just don't know because you're a person who doesn't know a lot in the world, but the person you're dealing with has had to explain this multiple times. So like you're the asshole. Like, I mean, there's others I'm sure as well, but to just run with that and say, okay, well, now you're racist and you must atone for all of this American sin that's been perpetuated for 500 years. Good luck.
It defeats the purpose. I mean, it pisses me off as a white person that does want to see equality of opportunity for black people and everybody, in that, like I said, the concept of white fragility, I think, is a thing, and it's an important thing because there is an exhaustion that happens when you day in, day out try to fucking explain to white people what it's really like to walk around in dark skin.
Sure.
And they're not hearing it.
Yeah.
And eventually you're just like, whatever. That's pretty reasonable. I can see how that would happen. So to me, doing the work is, go read some fucking books, because the black community has been writing wonderful literature on this very topic for decades.
Yeah.
So the work is go catch up on some history. To me, that's the work. Don't ask your one black friend to explain all this to you. That's kind of rude. I see that now. And I also understand the impulse to like, oh, hey, well, I like James. I'm going to go ask James. James, what's this all about? Well, James has tried to been fucking explaining this for the last 20 years with precisely zero effect in his life. So James doesn't want to do that shit anymore. James is tired.
Yeah.
I get that. Okay.
Sure.
That's fair. I can go read some books. And to me, that particular part of the message is going to absolutely be lost. Therefore, nobody is going to do what I consider the real work. except for a small group that are willing to buy into this all hook, line, and sinker. And for them, the work is not going to be seeking truth. It's going to be following this ideology and marching in whatever direction they deem appropriate without any of their own critical thought.
Yes, right, exactly. And again, that's where I come back to the personal responsibility of it. I agree with the problems, but not how to solve those problems. So I read a crap ton. Right now I'm enjoying some reading. I'm reading Harry Potter. It's been a lot of fun. A lot of critical words in those books, but because I haven't read them all the way through from book 1 to 7 in a long time. But
So wait, you didn't cancel Rowling?
no,
What kind of SJW are you, man?
right, exactly. I don't know enough about whatever the issue is that I think it's been multiple that she's been accused of, both with what she said and then what the problem seems to be, to comment on whether or not it's a problem. I did read her essay that she wrote after she was canceled for saying that women are women.
It's pretty controversial, man.
trans-
Biology is real.
in
How
the-
dare she?
Yeah, and then roughly speaking, it sounds like that trans women are not women. Like I said, I don't know enough about what the actual argument is there.
Science.
Yeah,
Let's take a look at your gametes.
like I said, I read
What's your
it-
chromosome situation?
I read her essay and was like, okay, this is fine. It also seems to me this is about the most intelligent I can get with this. If trans women are women, I don't understand why we have the phrase trans women.
Excellent point.
Like it's obviously more complicated than
Yeah.
that, but like that's what I don't understand is it's like, okay, so and I'm fine with having the breakdown of trans men and trans women. I don't care.
They would probably argue, yeah, you tell them. It
Yeah.
should just be women.
Sure.
Just like,
Yeah.
no.
But it was for a
There's
very
some
long
important
time.
distinctions.
Yeah, but it was for a very long time, and there seems to be a problem with that. And so we've, as a society, have been like, well, we're going to include the trans community. Great, no problem. Totally fine with that. But now it seems like it's the opposite. And like I said, again, I don't know a lot about this. So to me, what it seems like is for a very long time, we have men and women, and then everyone else that we don't like. The trans community, called whatever it's been called over the years, the gay community, and then historically that's been bad, and then heterosexuality's been good, men and women are fine.
There's the normies and the freaks.
Yeah, sure, exactly. And so then finally we wake up as a culture and we're like, well, it's really not that big of a deal because it's not a big fucking deal. I don't care what body parts they have or don't have. I don't care who they like. I don't care how they feel. Just do you and live your life.
Yeah.
Like, it's maybe harder, maybe easier. It doesn't matter. Like, it sucks.
Now, granted, if you're going to get into a cage and try and pummel someone else's face, we do need to know
We
what
need
your
to have some-
testosterone situation
Sure.
was in puberty.
Totally
That's
fine.
important and valid.
No, very, very true. But
Yeah.
and so you go from this. Would you say the normies and the freaks, right? Something to that effect. I don't want to generalize too much. I don't necessarily consider the individuals freaks, but I know that for a long time
I offered that way because that was the old
that's kind
view.
of how it was looked at.
Yeah.
Sure, right, exactly. And so then we include in the cultural vernacular the trans community, say the gay community, the LGBTQ.
They got more letters now. I
IA
haven't
two
kept
spirit.
up. Oh,
There's
there you go.
There's a
There you
lot
go.
now. Yeah. I don't know what a lot of them mean, but whatever the case, we're making space for that for them. And so we have trans women and trans men, and now trans women want to be just women, so like I don't understand why that's not a regression. Like that's the problem I'm having. It's like, well,
I think
do you want to be both? Do you want to be both women and trans women? Because those are supposed to be different things, and that's fine. They should be different. However, I don't understand why.
I think prior they weren't recognized as women. Prior they were other. They were freaks.
Sure.
So they're getting recognized at all. That's a good step.
And then they want to go from trans women recognized to women as
Right,
recognized. Okay,
right.
yeah. And like I said, I'm willfully ignorant on this, and so probably all of what I'm saying is offensive in some way, unfortunately. But that's the confusion that I initially had. It was like, well, if they want to, why do we have trans women if they want to be women? Then they would just be women and not trans women. Or are they trying to be both? And then we should figure that out. Like, and then there's the fighting issue, which is
And other sports. And
other sports. But
there
fighting's the big thing because
Yeah.
the physical differences with like upper body strength, hand size.
And the goal is to literally fuck somebody up.
Yeah, and
So
like,
physical advantages make a difference.
puberty, like
Yeah.
testosterone-filled puberty, like there's some legitimate issues there that can cause problems. But But yeah, so I actually lost my train of thought once we got on the J.K. Rowling. I was reading Harry Potter. So I'm reading through a large number of books that are mostly you're going to find on you're going to find on lists for classes in critical race theory and queer theory and women and gender studies, the kinds of work that everyone is saying you need to do. It's all this stuff. And so
How Not to Be Racist. I read that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the Ibram X. Kendi?
Or no, no. So you want to talk about race? So sorry. So you want to talk about race? I think I've got How to Be Anti-Racist and White Fragility in my Audible catalog right now. I haven't listened to them
my
yet.
goal is to go through because I'm actually genuinely curious in this stuff, and while I may disagree with the direction that this ideology is going, I see a lot of things in it that are I do believe will turn out very, very bad. That doesn't mean that the problems that they're bringing up are not wrong. Like they're like legitimate fucking problems. It's like I just don't agree with how they're going about doing it. I don't understand why telling an entire race of people that not only are they, but everyone that they know and love and was related to and was ancestrally related to is racist based on their melanin. I don't know how that's not divisive and going to cause a lot of fucking problems. Like
That's the point, though.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing is it's like
literally from a postmodern standpoint.
it is.
It's to agitate.
But I don't get how that's good. Like I don't understand how people can be like, oh, this is a great thing. All white people are going to feel great because they can finally, claim their racism but not be absolved of it. And all black people are just going to love the fact that all whites now know that they're racist and acknowledge it. It's like, I'm sure that neither are happy about this. I couldn't imagine being the one black person in a group of friends and they've all read White Fragility and all these other books and they walk in and they're like, fuck, everyone thinks they're racist now.
This is on eggshells.
Like, this is going to be weird as shit.
Yep.
And then all the white people are like, fuck, she knows that they know my black friend knows I'm racist now. Do they even want to be friends with me? And or like, can I say anything? Is it going to be racist?
Makes the whole thing fucking weird, man.
What if I say, what's up, brother? Like, is that racist? And then it just goes down the line and it's like, now everything you say is like, oh crap, I'm racist. And maybe I'm being hyperbolic about it.
But so is everybody else. Like, that's not inaccurate.
And so
that's
it's like,
the tone of the country right now.
I feel like there might be a better way to handle this situation. One is
there's probably 100 better ways.
Probably. And it's like, okay, does that mean that like the black community doesn't have issues and that we need to resolve them and that there are people who are racist against blacks and that's a problem, or against Hispanics and other people of color, the BIPOC community, Asians, whatever? It's like, no, that stuff happens, but why don't people should learn more anyways. So people should just continue to read and learn shit. So let's just do that first. And let's just try and be genuine to each other. Like, be truthful.
I think one of the important hinging points or pivoting points of this is the postmodern framework that everything is looked at from the lens of power. Not humanity, not loving your neighbor, not making the best we can with our situation, none of that. Everything is power, everything needs to be fought. Dude, the initial postmodernists, from what I understand, I'm just starting to learn on this, were very nihilistic.
Yeah.
Let's not use nihilists for the creation of policy.
Yeah.
That doesn't have a good future. That doesn't have any future, kind of by definition. They want to tear it all down, and then they're done.
Yes.
What the fuck? So that should not be given anywhere near the credence that it has. Not to say that there aren't, some ideas worth exploring in there, but as a philosophy and particularly as a component to the current social justice warrior critical race theory, I think we figured to call it the woke movement, the current invocation of that. Its only goal is destruction. And they feel it's justified, and they can make a case that will convince a lot of people.
They can make a strong case.
Yeah. But the end result is going to make it worse for everyone. If they think they can politically just shift wealth to black and brown bodies, that's fucking ridiculous. If, on the other hand, we see that there are expenditures in place that are not as valuable. And if we look at not only the racial component, but what I believe is more important, the class component, as it turns out, the black community typically ends up to be in poorer communities. Poorer communities tend to facilitate more crime. More crime facilitates more police. More police exposure to black people doing crime facilitates a prejudice towards black people, because day in, day out, those are the neighborhoods that they have to patrol. And the most memorable things, meaning arrests, shootings, all of that, just so happen to happen with people with darker skin. These are all things that play on human nature in a way that give us exactly what we're looking at. So if we can understand that and come at that from an end goal of unity. Well, how do we just make this better for everybody? Like, okay, I'm willing to learn more about this. I realize I've been ignorant on a lot of things. I want us to come together. So, like how Sam Harris puts it, that the color of your skin should be as important as the color of your hair, the color of your eyes. Like, let's just come together as people. Let's figure this out. We've got some really fucked up communities that happen to have, mostly black and brown folks in them. How can we help those communities to have more opportunity? Get rid of the gerrymandering, get rid of the redlining. All of these things, all the things that really are structural racism that facilitate the separation of classes and the maintenance of, and really the oppression of those classes that just so happen to be predominantly black and brown. I think that's a much more constructive and effective way to go about it, to actually get positive change for everybody, versus just trying to split everybody up and go to civil war. Really?
Yeah.
Why the fuck would you want to do that?
No, very, very true. So I want to posit a theory it's tangentially related. It still kind of has to do with what Biden said about history, but he said, let me pull it up here. People fear what is different. For example, why in God's name do we not teach history in history class? Now, I actually agree with that entire statement as it stands by itself. It seems as if he is comparing, it seems as if he is saying, just based on those two sentences alone, that we as a culture teach history the way that we do because white people fear black people. That's the impression that I get from that. Because blacks are different.
Well, history is written by the winners. So.
Sure, exactly. And so and he may have meant something different than that, but just that statement on its own, because he kind of threw it out there. Like I said, there wasn't really a qualifier to it.
I think one of my challenges with Brian, apologies to cut you off, is I find that he is one of those types of people, or it seems to be recently, that he will throw out what may be common understandings or shorthands within his crowd of people, but when he's speaking in public, it doesn't really make sense.
Yes.
Like if we have inside jujitsu references, and if we're out in public somewhere, and I can make that reference, or I can say, sweep the leg, Johnny, and people are like, what the fuck are you talking about? But it makes sense, because we have that reference. It seems like he's doing that same thing. I think I kind of get, why don't we teach history? But you really need to go into more detail, like the absence of, the Tulsa riots. Yeah. The trying to say that the Civil War was not about slavery and just all this other stuff. But it's important to point that out rather than just jumping to the shorthand that you could if you've already had that conversation with people. Yeah. Right. And I think that's he should know better. A lifelong politician, if you're speaking in public. Yeah. That's just not effective. So that's just something that struck me that he's. It always bugs me when people do that when they're trying to share their inside jokes in the public. It's like, well,
they leave stuff out. Like I said,
exactly, leave important details out.
Yeah, the part that confuses me or that I disagree with is the first sentence. That people fear that which is different. I don't disagree with that by itself. Right. Like that's tribalism. Like he's like describing tribalism, which has existed for thousands upon millions of years by not just humans, but other primates. So yeah, that's right. And then the other true statement is, why in God's name do we not teach history in history class? Also that's a valid question. But you put those two together, and the only conclusion I can draw is that what he's saying is that he's in Kenosha after some people died, like a lot of race issues going on, The only conclusion I can draw is that history is the way it's taught the way it is because white people are afraid of black people. And I actually don't, if that's what he means, I don't agree with that statement. I don't think that history is taught the way it is because whites fear blacks. I think that I go back to the helicopter parenting. I think one of many factors is that I think part of it is compassion and empathy. And I think that we're talking about like the desire to protect future generations from the pain of what happened, because it's painful. It really is fucking painful. And so then we go through the white fragility, potentially, like all that kind of stuff, and this helicopter parenting. And so this leads me to my theory. We've talked a little bit before personally, I think we might have on our last podcast about the devouring mother, the psychological archetype of the devouring mother, the mother who shelters. If don't leave, I have everything you need. Kid leaves, something bad happens because the world's bad. Comes back and she's like, see, you stay here. I'll protect you and I'll shelter you. Kind of the opposite end of that is the tyrannical father, which is to say the crushing weight of society, because society is brutal, whether it's oppressive and systemically racist on one end, or it's just competitive and hard on the other. Let's say if we want to get political.
The natural world.
Yeah, the natural, like
nature is brutal.
Well,
Nature's metal.
So I'm this is separate from nature. I'm thinking specifically culture.
Well, I'm just saying, like at a core level, which
Very
culture
true.
comes from.
Correct, because it's
yeah.
birthed from
Brutality
from
is
the
natural.
ashes. Culture is birthed from the ashes of nature.
Yeah.
Right, and also from the ashes of its own dead forefathers. Right. So as culture dies, it has to be revivified by future generations. Otherwise, it becomes tyrannical naturally. And so you have the tyrannical father that kind of crushes people down. You get people who are beat up by culture and then they retreat. And that's when you get bad things. Or, people maybe go off on their own and live on their own, or they say, fuck the world, and they flip the board up. That's when you get anarchy, right? So here's my theory. My theory is that this attempt at protection has created this schism culturally. On one side, you have sheltered white people who are forever protected by the devouring mother, the mother who won't let go and wants to shield them from all the pain in the world. And they don't actually grow up to become fully functioning adults. And I don't mean that like literally like white people aren't fully functioning adults, but that's kind of how the archetype runs, right? Is that you're not fully exposed to the horrors of the world. You're forever protected. But on the other side, you have the black community, which is laid bare in a barren wasteland with little to no protection, because they have all of the realities of this oppression, among other things. And they're being crushed by the weight of society, which would be the tyrannical father, because they've been told the truth. And there's this schism because neither talk to each other, because one is overprotective and one is dying from the weight of what a rotted culture over time has kind of, that they're stuck with. Does that make sense?
That does. That's an interesting perspective.
And so I want to make a distinction here, a very clear distinction. I'm not suggesting that the entirety of our culture is systemically oppressive and racist and deserves to be taken down, because I don't think that that's true. I think that there is systemic issues in as much as corporations and parts of the I don't know. I don't like the term systemic here. I think that there are actual issues that are fracturing our culture and our and our society and our government and the things that are within it. That actually is a real thing. But to the extent that it's systemic, I'm not convinced of that. Mostly because I don't know how to be convinced. I don't know what is necessary to convince me of that. That's the first thing.
Okay.
The second thing is that society is always, to some degree, going to crush people, because society is hard. Whether it's based on power and oppression or it's based on competence and meritocracy, society is hard. And it's unequally distributed. That's why we have inequality. So for the people who do really well because they're competent, they're smart, they're powerful, they lie, they cheat, they're sociopathic, they have money, whoever's at top, there's probably more reasons people would get at top, life is good. But for everyone who's at the bottom, all the homeless, underprivileged communities with no money, people who are turning to be, say, drug dealers who that's the best thing that they can do, and they make more money doing that than getting like quote unquote a real job that pays shit wages.
Sure.
Like that's oppressive to them in that respect, in that it pushes them down to the bottom of the barrel. That's how society is. That's how all societies are, regardless of whether you try to have equity, equality of outcome, or equality of opportunity. You will have that, and the counter to that cannot be the devouring mother. It can't be the other half of this society is sheltered and carried away in loving arms and never able to grow. You need to have the good king, right? You need to have Mufasa to Scar in Lion King, right? You need to have someone who needs to say, hey, okay, this is bad. We have to fix it, but we have to talk and communicate and find a way past this. Does that make sense? And so, anyway, that was the theory. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but
all good. See if I can remember. So, in addressing kind of the current social situation, you touched on not teaching history and the helicopter parenting devouring mother. I think that the helicopter parenting devouring mother model is absolutely a piece of it, and that's a matter of self and family interest. You want to do best for your kids, and you think that's the best way to go. And
Yes.
I guess as I gave an example, it actually was beneficial in certain respects in my life, so I can kind of get that, and that's not super healthy. Where history being taught, I think, is less to do with that and more to do with who is deciding and approving what gets taught
sure.
in the schools, meaning the individual teachers have very little say what they teach.
Yeah, from districts, yes.
Right. And as the organization grows larger, meaning school districts to national school boards, then politics becomes more and more important, and you get these different political drivers that we don't want the party to look bad, or it's going to reflect poorly on this, that, or the other. And there's a whitewashing from a political stance
Sure.
that I think is a bigger driver than personally wanting to protect the kids in terms of what gets taught in schools. And then where do we go from that? So there was
I'll read my theory again.
okay.
I'll read it through. And so this attempted protection that I'm arguing for has created a cultural schism. On one side, you have sheltered white people forever protected by the devouring mother. And on the other side, you have the black community laid bare in a barren wasteland with little to no protection, being crushed by the weight of the tyrannical father. And then to be clear there, the tyrannical father is actually culture. And that's what that, I believe, psychologically represents. And then broadly speaking, the devouring mother is going to represent nature, as does the mother generally. Generally, you have the mother. That's why you have mother nature,
Right.
most specifically. And then culture is generally represented as masculine. And from both, you have the society that we create. And so,
Sorry, I was just pondering that model.
No, like I said,
it could go different ways, but yeah, traditionally that's the male female.
that's traditionally how it's broken
Sorry,
down. Like,
yeah,
and there's
yeah.
ways to do it to do it differently, but that's typically how it comes about. And so, it was just a thought that struck me that I was curious to throw on you before we ended to see what your thoughts were on it too, because I mean, culture is oppressive naturally, and it's going to. Different cultures are going to affect people differently.
This is where my brain keeps sticking. So sorry.
Sure, no worries.
Does it fit for your model to say society is crushing versus culture?
It's the same thing for me here.
Okay. For me, there's a distinction. Whereas culture is the individual flavor, if you will, of a certain group of people, meaning your social traditions, the foods that you eat, and all that kind of stuff, versus society, which is just human beings trying to figure it out and work together. And to me, because culture oftentimes is felt as a much more personal thing that I think should just be explored and celebrated. And there's so many cool cultures that
Yes.
people do stuff different. That's really awesome. But then society as a way to structure things and how that affects the members of society, that's more of a direct effect upon the people versus just the choices and the preferences and the flavors of how they want to do things. I think it's important to make that distinction.
So here's how I would clarify that with how I'm thinking through the theory. The overarching culture of the U.S., so not the plurality of cultures, because there's multiple cultures.
Right.
That's one of the things that makes the U.S. great compared to a lot of other countries, is that we allow for a plurality of cultures. But there is a meta culture that the U.S. is known for that other countries are not, regardless of the different types of races and religions and creeds of people who live here. There's something about being an American.
Oh, yeah, travel anywhere around the world.
Exactly.
You're an American.
It doesn't matter if you're any color, any race, any religion.
Yeah.
That's the culture that I'm talking about, and then
Okay.
it in and of
So
itself.
let's say American culture then.
Yeah, right, exactly. But that you're right. That does seep into the society at large.
I would just hate for the Cuban Americans to get upset or something. It's like,
No, sure, no,
hey.
that's a good distinction. And so I was thinking of the tyrannical father more of the overarching American culture as however that is defined by, because it'll pretty much be defined very similarly by most. The distinctions I see being people who are for American culture will have a little bit more positive nature to it, and those who are against American culture and say just America in general will think it's a little bit more oppressive, but it's still hard and it still crushes people. And I think you could make a very strong case, or probably is actually true, that it does crush minorities more than it would the majority. And I mean, that isn't necessarily just with the US. You find that pretty much everywhere. The minority culture, the minority people in any country tend to have a harder time with the prevailing culture. Like that's kind of how that works.
Yeah,
that's a
absolutely.
problem, and we have our own issues because of our plurality of cultures and societies in our country. But yeah. So did that help clarify?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
good. So tell me some thoughts. Tell me what you think.
Oh, man.
I'm curious to kind of bounce this off because I gave it about 5-10 minutes of thought, and then I did to drive over here to do this, and so I wanted to kind of run that by.
So specifically on the...
I'm curious how you feel about the schism between the line that I'm drawing between whites and blacks in our culture, and why, and how tenable or non-tenable it seems if it's true.
Okay, so my thoughts would be...
Or do you disagree entirely with how I'm classifying both the white and black communities in these psychological terms?
Not entirely. I think that the main difference is rather than black-white, it's more of a class difference, meaning
Okay.
in order to shield and helicopter your child, that requires means. The more means that you have, the higher you are in society, middle class, upper class, then you have more opportunity to do exactly that. On the flip side, if you are working 2-3 jobs just to keep food in the fridge and the rent paid, and you got 2 kids that you're doing the best you can, and dad's long gone,
They're going to see some shit.
they're going to see some shit. It just so happens that a larger proportion of the lower class people in America are black and brown. But I think there are not the same, but similar effects to someone growing up white in lower class. Mm-hmm. I was definitely lower middle. We did food stamps. I am very familiar with the 5-pound brick of government cheese, et cetera. And I saw plenty of shit. I didn't have to face racism myself, so I definitely want to acknowledge that, because that is absolutely one more thing to contend with that is not good. But I think the important differentiator is not specifically racial, but it is class. Mm-hmm. And if you have the means to take care of you and yours, you're going to do so. And whether or not it's misguided, you may shelter them from being exposed to certain nasty realities of the world.
Yes.
And that is going to create a divide, and it's going to create a lot of ignorance that may be tough to shed light on.
Yes.
If subconsciously someone who's been sheltered from that realizes that, look, if this is true, this is going to rock my world, and I don't even want to believe that, so I'm not.
Yeah.
I choose not to believe it. I'm taking the blue pill. I'm just going to pretend this never happened. And by the way, I want to be someone important when you stick me back in the Matrix.
Yeah, I was just literally just thinking.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a it's a self-defense mechanism
Sure.
that is going to happen with a lot of people, whether it's conscious or not. Mm-hmm. But all which to say, I mean, that's semantics. I guess it's an important distinction to know, what it is that you're aiming at. But the class difference definitely is important. and it's as old as people, you know. So it's definitely nothing new. We need to come together as thoughtful human beings and continue to try and work out the best way to level that playing field. But to start from a point of division, I don't think is the answer at all. That leads to civil war, which I'm not a fan of.
That I agree with. I agree with that. And I think your point about classism is interesting. I don't think we hear... There's been an intentionality with addressing the problems that we currently face as race and gender-based versus class-based.
Mm-hmm.
We don't hear about class-based. And I think the reason we don't hear about class-based is because there was a lot of classist issues in the 20th century, and a shit ton of people died. So you can't talk about class issues when between Lenin, Stalin, and Mao, somewhere between like 25 and 150 million people were killed.
Right.
Right. That's a huge error bar. But
Well, you can talk about it, just
but you're going
don't
to
use socialism as the answer.
Well,
tried that one.
yeah, exactly. Multiple, like a dozen times. And so I think that that's partly why this switch was made, is that, well, let's talk about something a little bit different. And there's validity in talking about the inequities of race and gender. But
There is. I think there's an important distinction that goes with the addition of transgender in that conversation.
tell me.
And you can say even like gay, lesbian, and queer, because you could potentially opt into that. Heather Hang made this point, and I agree with it. Is there is you could call it a slippery slope, or it's a concern for sure when you can opt in to the membership of a certain group. If you've got a lot of melanin and you're dark, you don't get to take that off. You can't hide it. You can't be an in the closet black, right? No such thing.
Well, we'll get to that in a second.
Well, some rare light skin. My uncle's actually super light skinned, and he would qualify as that. But you know what I'm saying? If you're black, then you can't hide it.
However, I'll take that point. Yeah.
However, if the societal circumstances are such that there is an attempt to overcompensate for inequities of the inequities of a certain group, and you happen to be able to opt into that group.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'm trans now because of X, Y, and Z rights that have just been established, and it'll make it easier, or these certain grants or whatever. That changes the equation.
Yeah.
It's just like Blue Lives Matter. You know, black folks say, "Motherfucker, I can't take off a uniform when I get home.
Yeah.
I'm black all the time." And there's a similar danger with transgender, or even just the option to claim whether or not you actually are gay or lesbian.
Yeah.
You can easily claim that you are, and
Remember
nobody can
that-
say shit about it.
Well, because if they do, you're queer,
Right.
you're queerphobic,
Yeah.
transphobic, what have you. Yeah.
And that is potentially very problematic.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's very interesting shit. I had a thought. Give me a couple seconds and see if I can gather. Okay. So for me, I want to close up my last thoughts on the theory that I proposed. The reason that I ascribe the tyrannical father to culture and place that burden on, not really burden, and why I think that that's crushing, say, the black community, or just the BIPOC community as a whole, let's say, or any minority community, is because I do actually think that our current culture is getting closer to, if not already, tyrannically broken. I think that there actually is a legitimate problem with our culture, to the point that it needs to be destroyed. I don't agree with that. And to the point that it's done for, I don't agree with that. But there is an actual problem. And we're seeing it with, we're talking about critical race theory, and this is actually one of the things that I look at, and I think this is an example to me of why our culture is heading towards that tyrannical aspect, is because we're not learning from our past mistakes. I'd mentioned about 20, 30 minutes ago that one of the things that I think that we have to do as a species is we have to revivify our culture on the corpse of our dead forefathers. And what I mean by that is that all of the people before us developed a culture and societies and ways of being using the traditions that they learned from their ancestors and so on and so forth, all the way back. And over time, very slowly, those things changed when bad shit happened. So like as an example, I do believe that years down the road, people are going to look back at this time and say, that's the moment in history that we actually got our shit together. Because that's the first time when gays could get married and when it was okay to be gay and there wasn't something wrong with you, it wasn't abhorrent, you weren't going to go to hell because of these sinful things and stuff like that, because we decided as a culture that it was fine and it should be fine. But that's what happens with culture over time is we discover the problems and we finally fix them. And if we take too long to do that, culture dies with the people, the generations that die. And if we don't revivify those traditions and change them to update with the culture, then we just basically live on a rotting corpse.
I agree, and I
think we're getting to that point. Well, I think we've made some strides, and there are some things. I think the problem is that we're not learning from mistakes, and so I see a critical race theory as an example, and it's literally pulling from dead ideas, from ideas that don't work, and they're like, "This is the good. If you don't follow this, you're bad. Let's do communism." And it's like,
gotcha. Okay,
right? That's one example, and it's like, and then on the other end of it, no one listens to this. Most people don't listen to this, but on the other end, to give the devil its due, let's say, on the more conservative, radical end of it, it's ethno-nationalism. But there's a little bit more punch to let's just take out an entire race of people. Like, there's a punch to that statement. There's not really a punch to the other end of it of let's have equity. Right. And so no one really listens to that side. But when we see this polarization, ethno-nationalism kicks up, right? You see more white supremacist stuff that does kick up. And why? Because our culture's rotting. It's not rotted to the core yet, but it's rotting. And so you see people reaching back into our past and pulling stuff that may have worked. And they're not revivifying it and saying, this shit doesn't work. We need to grow something new.
I agree. And I think this is exactly what has been happening, what will happen, what should happen, meaning every generation, ours included, looks back at the previous generation.
Yeah.
Man, I can't believe how fucked up they were. I'm glad we're making progress now.
Yeah.
And the kids that come after us are going to say the same thing about us. And I think that process has been ongoing since the founding of the country. And from women's suffrage to the civil rights movement to gay marriage and everything in between, all the stuff that we have figured out. In our lifetime, we get to see but a couple of frames of the movie because it's a long movie.
Yeah.
So it takes time. And I only bring this up because, they look back at 2020, that's when they got their shit together. Nope. That's just a couple more frames in the movie.
Yeah.
You could draw that line at so many different places, which is great because that's how it has to work. You're not going to get it all fixed in a year. There's no way. There is the process of changing a society. It's a big ship to turn, and there's going to be some people that are early adopters and they get it right away.
Yep.
There's going to be some people that push back just because that's what they do and they're rebellious. There's going to be some people that take a while to think about it, and there'll be some people that just never get it. And we have to wait for them to die. And that's a normal part of it too. They won't be part of the conversation because they'll be in the dirt. And new people will be having new conversations and rinse and repeat for the last 275 years. So to me, it's we've been making progress.
I agree with that.
We should continue to make progress. And if we are trying to resurrect old ideas, take a real close look as to why those are old ideas and got buried.
Exactly. And no, I totally agree. And here's what I'll end with. This is why I think the work's never done. That's one of the reasons why.
Okay. From that context, yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I agree with that statement from the top is that we have to continually the work is challenge. It's challenging ideas. It's challenging information. It's challenging the traditions that we hold dear and making sure also that we don't lose them, because you don't just get one and not the other. You can't just challenge ideas, throw them away, and then never have traditions.
Sure.
You need traditions. You have to have them. Otherwise, you have nihilism. I think fundamentally, if you take that deep enough, you just get to an objectionless reality where nihilism is the only thing left.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing to pull from. And so
that doesn't make for good summer vacations.
No, right, exactly. And for me, that's what the work really means, is that part of it is that what did our ancestors get right and wrong, and how can we learn from it?
Right. I think it's important to make the distinction that when you say the work is never done, that does not imply that white people will never have absolution. Unfortunately, I think that is the implication, and that is what a lot of white people are inferring from that statement. And at that level, I completely disagree. But in general, yeah, we should always be striving to do better. Why would you not want to get better? That's a human nature that we should embrace and use that in a positive manner.
That should be a human, like a cultural universal across that transcends race, gender, politics, religion.
It is. It really is. It may not be like 100% universal, but in every culture, there's always a group, and typically a large group of people that are trying to push things forward. Yeah. In an evolutionary sense, because that's the lens I like to look through, that is the reason we are here. It's because we are competitive and we are curious. Mm-hmm. And being curious gives us a competitive advantage. So that's that's so deep in our DNA, that's not ever going anywhere. And it's a very useful trait.
Yes.
We got to learn how to harness it correctly and not hurt other people. But yeah, curiosity and wanting to do better, that's a good thing, and that's baked in. So.
I agree. All right, well, everybody, this has been Beyond Red and Blue Podcast. Keep up the good work, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. And one note, I want to say that we're framing this just as a conversation between Beau and I that we get to share with everybody. But really, I think the important thing is that anybody that has conversations that resonate like this, whether it's starting your own podcast that you don't intend to publish, what Beau and I are discovering is that taking the time to have a deliberate discussion, and we throw up a couple of microphones, but really it's the discussion itself that forces us to think more concisely about some of these topics. Mm-hmm. And even if nobody else ever hears this is so incredibly valuable to us that hopefully we can get other people to do the same. Again, publish it or not, but have these conversations with the people that think deeply about these things.
And don't be afraid.
And don't be afraid. Get one-on-one, even if it's over, Zoom or something like that. But have these conversations with people and encourage them to do the same thing. So maybe you talk to a friend of yours and that friend goes to talk to some different friends, and keep these kind of conversations going, because right now in social media, this kind of thing is not allowed. And if that becomes our sole means of communication through, 280 characters and Facebook takedowns and all that mess, then it is literally going to shift our humanity and our reality in a very negative way. Mm-hmm. So keep having good conversations, keep thinking deeply, and we'll talk to you next time.
Peace, guys.